So our theme is a question: what is meant by mental purity? That's literally what the subject is. And I suppose in order to discuss this, we have to find out, is this an important subject at all? And so we start off with an axiom which says that all spiritual endeavor, all research into finding out the higher truth, regardless of religion or system or model, is essentially based on a psychological process of purifying the mind. Now, this may not seem very obvious because many religions have as their center worship, ritual, love of God, and that, of course, is a very wonderful way, a very sweet way, but essentially it is to do with purifying the mind. And then we have this word sin. It essentially belongs to the Judeo-Christian or the Abrahamic tradition, and even says that we are born in a state which is where we have to be rescued from whatever sin is, and we probably have to define what that is. But I suppose the best way of dealing with the subject is by analogy. Because when we ask the question, what is pure and what is purity, we know straight away, because we all drink water, what pure water looks like and tastes like, and what impure water looks like and tastes like. Going through in rural areas, in the bush you might say, we may come across a stream in Zimbabwe, and if you're wise, you'll have some kind of purifying tablets, probably containing chlorine and so on. And you put it in a bottle, and that purifies the water. But water is contaminated by particles. And part of the water purification system done en masse will be water filtration. And to assist that water filtration, we have something, some chemical like aluminum sulfate that makes an agglomerate of materials, makes them heavy, and that allows them to sink down to the bottom. And that leaves clear water on the top. So how does this analogy help us in understanding the purity of the mind? Well, perhaps when we are born, the mind is not tabula rasa, it is not a blank slate. We may think that we are born in pure innocence, but the very human condition we have, even the fact of responding to our environment by crying, will tell us that we have come into a world which is not full of clarity and purity. In fact, if anything is to exist in the external world, it has to have a blemish. There's no such thing as a pure anything. If there was a pure anything, it would be a very dull world. So, all our experience is learned experience, and we come into this world struggling. And I suppose we can theologically identify this in the Judeo-Christian tradition as original sin. And original sin comes from a mythological story in Genesis. You see, we are quite happy in a paradise situation. And that is a symbol, if you like, an allegory for everything is happy, everything is blissful, everything is joyful, because we are living in awareness and consciousness of our most natural nature. This is Adam and Eve, really representing man itself, mankind, that's Adam. And then what happens, of course, we are challenged. And interestingly enough, the challenge is not ignorance, the challenge is knowledge. And so the challenge is, don't eat from the fruit of the tree of good and evil, or the fruit of knowledge. In other words, for the first time, we're evaluating things which are good and evil. Other things in nature don't have this evaluation. They don't consider whether it is good to bite or not. When a lion gets up in the morning in the African bush and sees a gazelle grazing nicely, it doesn't think it is a bad thing to attack that. It thinks only of its breakfast. So the gazelle to the lion becomes breakfast. There is no moral evaluation going on because nature is working in a harmonious way where good and bad, in our interpretation, is just the plus and minus that keeps the harmony, overall harmony of life going. But why are we in a state of disharmony? And the conclusion is, yes, we are in a state of disharmony, both in world affairs and both in your personal life. You may see that maybe things are not going 100% well. There is always a kind of disturbance going on. And if we are to use the analogy of water again, supposing we are to nicely settle all the debris contained in water that it should float, but then you make it sink through aluminum sulfate or some other kind of thing, then when you agitate it again, it becomes dirty again. So is the mind like that? And according to the Sankhya and Yoga psychology, the experts in the subject, yes, it's exactly like that. We can consider the mind to be something like a body of water, and it's in a state of agitation because various waves are there disturbing the overall mind stuff, which the yogis describe as chitta, mind stuff, the lake of the mind, if you will. And it's a constant state of agitation. And our modern life is designed, perhaps, to exacerbate that and give us much more disharmony. So we know that the cow chews cud, it has four stomachs, but we as humans chew the cud of resentment. We worry, we have a lot of anxiety. And why is that? It's because we accept the agitation which is in the mental frame, and we think that it is absolutely normal. Well, is this really our normal condition, or can the lake of the mind be entirely clarified and quiet, in other words, purified? In which case, what will the effect on us be? The effect will be revelation, based on the idea that there is absolutely nothing to improve in our life. There is no progression. Whatever it is there complete and total. Nothing has to be added to it or taken away from it. If we have this understanding, then the whole of our spiritual endeavor, the whole of our life, which really has this one aim, that is to be free or to see God, a vision of God, the whole of this life is simply a skillful technique applied, which is to harmonize the waves. And because things come and create the waves from inside and outside, we say outside, but actually it's all inside, because anything that comes, any misfortune, so-called, that comes to us, our reaction to it is what causes the disturbance, not the event, not the so-called misfortune. What a pity, somebody made me do this, or the circumstance made me do that. If it wasn't for this, I would be fine. No, what is your reaction? And are we simply helpless in our reaction? Or can we notice reaction, take note of it, observe it carefully, observe it as a habitual part of behavior, step back, and then change the next second, the next second, the next second, the next second, until we form a new way of habitually dealing with things. Something which is calmer, something which has complete trust, something that has no fear in it, something that has all the positive qualities in it also, such as love and beauty and truth and goodness and harmony. All of these things we are capable of producing, and no other biological species, if we put ourselves in that category, is capable of doing that. Because all species, whether it's a tree, whether it's a flower, whether it's a fern, whether it's an animal, whether it's an insect, are all in response mode and driven also by filling a need. And that's the way we operate. But now we have the opportunity to get out of that mundane existence, and we have the opportunity to transcend everything. But we need to apply some effort. The effort is called spiritual practice, and it is as simple as clarifying, purifying the mind. Because the truth really of what is there is hidden from us, and therefore clarification and purification equates to lifting up whatever is in the way. It's called an obstacle. The Bhagavad Gita explores what is the origin of sin. In the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, from the 36th stanza to the 43rd stanza, we have a beautiful expose in answer to the question. Arjuna vacha atakena prayuktoyam papam charati purushaha. Goes like that. Impelled by what? He asks. Does a person commit sin? In other words, agitates the mind and disturbs themselves. Even against your wish. Nobody wishes to do bad. Nobody wishes to get angry. Nobody wishes to fight with another necessarily. Nobody wishes to increase their heart rate to the point of a collapse of the heart or a heart attack. Nobody wishes to fall ill. Nobody wishes to make an enemy. Nobody wishes to have a paucity of needs. So we don't wish a badness or immorality on ourselves, but yet it happens. And so it seems that we are impelled toward this. And Arjuna, in his question to Krishna, is highlighting this fact. He says, being driven, as it were, by force. There's a great force within us that tells us to go against the tendency toward clarification and purity. In other words, the tendency to create a wave that disturbs the mind, a series of waves. And if we really, truly understood it and its effect and took it 100% seriously, then we wouldn't do it. But what's the answer? What is this force? How can we deal with it? And so, Sri Krishna is answering the Blessed Lord, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, Kama Isha Krodha Isha Rajaguna Samudbhava. The Lord said, it is desire. Let's pause there. What do we mean by desire? Desire means that we value the world as something that has a deficit. We begin with a deficit. We think that we should do something to fill this deficit. We don't think that we are full and free. We don't think that there's a pristine thing within us which cannot be added to or taken away from. We identify ourselves in a fragmentary way and say, I'm an individual, and whatever you see as body and mind, that is me. And in connection with that, there are all kinds of relationships around that me. A mother, a father, siblings, a job, colleagues, all of these things, friends, enemies, all of that forms a circle. And then life that we often view as a struggle. You can turn the light on probably. So it is desire. That's his first thing. Kama. Esha Krodha. It is anger. Anger born of the Raja Guna. So let us see. What is anger? We are told very clearly anger or frustration or any mild or exaggerated version of it is called krodha, anger. It means I didn't get what I want. Now let us go back to our own childhood and even observe other children. Children have a tendency to desire something. They haven't got the wisdom to know whether it's good for them or not. And if they're not given it,
throw their toys out of the pram.
They throw their toys out of the pram. They stamp, they cry, they make a nuisance of themselves. They nag on with a kind of immature strategy which says, if I go on long enough, it will come to me. But behind it is really, even a desire for a small thing becomes like a life and death situation to a child, because they linger on it over and over again. And in adulthood, do we outgrow that? Well, not really. So we feel that there has to be a desire that is fulfilled, and it is not necessarily a desire, as a child has, for something. Because behind the desire will be something very subtle. And on the last weekend, this weekend that is just gone, we are exploring this, the desires and fears belonging to all of us in different ways. And we do this through the Enneagram, the essence of truth. And there we see that all the personality types will have a certain desire and a corresponding fear. And it may not be a desire for wealth or anything like that. It may well be a desire to be acknowledged or accepted against a fear of being rejected. Here's one example of it. So, where is this coming from? It comes from Raja Guna, that is, a characteristic within us which is entirely centered around our individuality. It is something that is active, it has a function, but it gives us frustration, and frustration gives us pain. And for this reason, and the fact that it muddies the waters and doesn't give us this eternal peace that passes all the understanding, this calmness, because of this, because we've just thrown a wave up, then it is our enemy. Our own enemy is what we create by our reaction. So know this as the enemy here, not elsewhere, but right here, immediately. And it's insatiable. And the cause of all this disturbance that we can encapsulate in this world, let us say, sin. Of course, there's no word in Sanskrit for sin. There's an English translation. But we can, from this, say, this lack of purity, this disturbing aspect, all these waves coming up and not giving us any peace of mind, naturally, is all turbulent. And then he goes on to give an example, beautiful example. 3 examples are given, which shows us that the strategy of trying to get something that is fulfilling a desire and not getting it, these 2 things, that is kama and krodha, all of this is because we are not understanding that our true nature is already pure and that what's in the way is hiding it. And we have to acknowledge that. Once we acknowledge it, then we have to have the strategy of how do we remove this obstacle. By removing this obstacle, then we can clarify and purify the mind. So, Dumina Vriyate Vahniyan, as fire is covered up by smoke, as a mirror is covered up by dust, as an embryo is covered by the womb, so is this knowledge of this eternal peaceful state, this eternal pristine purity, which is our true nature. This is called knowledge, is covered by that desire. Knowledge is covered. by this insatiable fire of desire. Insatiable because we may satisfy one, but then another one comes along, or we want a different variety, or more of the same, a number of things we want. But it is like a fire, and a fire requires fuel, and desire fuels the fire continuously, more and more and more. And so the constant enemy is this constant enemy of those of the wise, or those who want peace of mind, those who want to clarify all this disturbance. Be kind to yourself by doing it, and control your reactions. Indriyani mano buddhye, the senses, the mind, the intellect are said to be its seat. Where does this desire come from? It comes from a mind that has to be purified, but the components of the mind, which are functional and have a good use, they are the sense organs. We think that the senses are external to us. No, the real senses are internal, and when the outside senses go down, as it were, when the eyes close, the ears close down, we call this sleep, then all the senses come up in adventurous events called dreams. And when we sit down for meditation, we can make a planned dream. We can bring these out. So we have the senses. And then we have what is really called mano, the mind. This mind that is, of course, linked in many people's minds with the symbol of the moon. And I mentioned the moon because the blood moon is there yesterday, last night, and tonight. And I happened to see it this morning also. And you can see it probably if it's not too cloudy. The distance of the Earth from the moon is much less than it normally is, and therefore the moon is seen to be extremely large. But the mind, what is that? The mind is every single part of our mental activity other than what is called buddhi or intellect. The intellect is that faculty which is able to choose, which is able to control the mind and the senses. Anyway, these three things, senses, mind, and intellect, these are said to be the seat of desires. And by these, it deludes the embodied soul by veiling his wisdom, because don't ever think that you are the mind, don't ever think you are your senses or the body, don't ever think that you are this faculty called intellect. There is some supreme entity ruling within you. That is who you are. That is the kingdom of heaven within. That is your own pristine nature. That is your inheritance, if you will. That is the I am that I am. That is the authentic self. And failure to notice that, failure to do that is equivalent to identifying yourself with all this transient instrumentation, and that becomes a trouble for us. So our wisdom is being veiled, and that means then that this veil is what we call the impurity of the mind. Things are muddied. There is a clue to it when we somehow feel that there is an internal entity, there is an I which is there, there is a sense of self-identity which is there, no doubt. There is a sense of internal joy when we respond joyfully. This is all a clue to our own nature, and we don't want to end our life, generally speaking. We want to perpetuate it, and it's evidence of an existent entity deep down that never goes away. So how is it that we become deluded by this? This is therefore controlling the senses. Now he gives the clue. How do we purify the mind? We start by controlling the senses at the outset. We have to slay the sinful destroyer of knowledge and realization. The senses, and we do this by understanding what controls what. So there's an order of things. The senses are said to be superior to the body, and the mind is superior to the senses, and the intellect is superior to the mind, but that which is superior to the intellect, that is your immortal self. That is what is called simply Atman, self. And so, therefore, just knowing the self as superior to the intellect, you can control, you now have the capacity to control the self, the small self, all of these aggregates of component parts, by this immortal self, and destroy the enemy which comes in the form of desire and is indeed very difficult to understand. Now, we're not glossing over the difficulty in doing this, but we have to have a sporting attitude. After all, if all we're dealing with is aggregates and waves and things that come and things that go, and there's a stable entity which is there, should we take life as seriously as we do? Probably not. So, Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras gives us the psychology of it. He says control is by practice. Practice and non-attachment. What do we mean by practice? See, the mind to have non-attachment must be clear. Like a lake has to be clear. It must be good. It must be rational. And another way of putting this is by deliberately cultivating noble qualities, things which have no self-orientation, that are not associated with the body and mind. It puts you outside of your self-interest immediately and fills you with purity, but that's another wave. And the key is that we are cultivating counter waves to that of desires. Now you may say, but what about a desire to love God? That's something different. That's a legitimate desire. That is a desire which arouses a wave which we call sattva. And sattva's characteristic is any thought or word or deed which has no egocentricity about it. It is for the good of another, or it is simply enjoying the purity and beauty of the present moment. Rajas, the thing that disturbs us most in terms of desires, will be a future-orientated exercise. Because if I have a desire for something, clearly I haven't got it now. I may have had it in the past. I may wish to repeat it. But clearly, if I want something, it would have to be dragged from the future. I want it in the future. If possible, I want it now, but the now used to be a future moment, and it's now slipped into the past. So by cultivating the counter wave, that is the technique in the lake, we neutralize these other two, characterized as enormous energetic activity, desire, and also just lethargy. This is rajas and tamas that we call it. These are called gunas. They are binding elements. They bind us. But sattva also binds us. So we have to learn to transcend everything. And we use the mind in order to neutralize. By using the positive aspect of it, we neutralize the negative aspects. We neutralize those things which are damaging to us. These things are our enemy. Now Ramakrishna gives a beautiful example about it. I'm sure you've heard it countless times. That a wealthy person is going on his way and is pounced upon by 3 robbers. And these robbers, of course, will be these binding elements which we call guna. And these gunas are 3, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Sattva representing illumination, revelation. Rajas representing a go-getter attitude, an attitude which says, let me do something, and in brackets, for my own benefit. And tamas is the densest of everything. So these three robbers, let's call them Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, they then rob the person. But Tamas has this idea in mind. It says, let us now, having robbed him of his freedom, we can say in the story, of course it's of the wealth, but really the idea is it's robbing us of our freedom. It's robbing us of our tranquility. It's robbing us of our serenity. It says, let us kill this man. And Rajas comes to the director and say, well, let's not kill him, let's just tie him up. And then Sattva unties the person, guides him over to his home, makes sure he's looked after, cared for, and so on. And naturally the victim is saying, well, why don't you stay? And he says, I can't stay because the police are still looking for me and they'll arrest me. So Sattva is the way out of Rajas and Tamas, but it is a means to an end, and itself has to be transcended. It guides us to an internal understanding, and then we have to bid farewell to it. Because, see, anything that is a movement of that kind will be also a wave. But these waves, called Sattva, they neutralize the interference waves of Rajas and Tamas. And we have this interference wave that is called Sattva. For this reason, all spiritual practice has in mind to elevate the spirit. They do it through many different ways. Let's be specific about it. When we go into a beautiful church that has been built over, let's say, 100 years, with tremendous resources, with great enthusiasm, with great danger also, but with great, great engineering skill, employing artisans of every type and employing artists so that we have magnificent cathedrals with stained glass windows that allow the sunlight to come in. Or the beautiful Jain temple that we find around the area of Mount Abu, around Gujarat, where we see every square inch carved in marble. What inspires a human to go and do these things? It is purely this idea of Sattva. For the greater glory of God, if you will. And that means, therefore, that all this hard work is not seen as an arduous chore or labor. It's a labor of love. Until finally we get this. Over the weekend we were discussing Angkor Wat in Cambodia, and the beautiful structure and the care and the tremendous engineering skills and knowledge and understanding, but all put together with an artist's eye. And we stand there and wonder at the magnificence of it, the symbolism of it, and how people could engage in this activity. Some 5,000 years ago, people, ancient ancestors in Britain, decided that they would collect huge, massive stones with great engineering skill. And recently they found out that what was called the altar stone, and don't forget, we've had the Stonehenge is there in southern England, and this altar stone comes from Scotland, northern part of Scotland. Imagine. They just discovered it now. A Welshman discovered it. I don't know how happy he was, because all the other stones come from Wales. So what inspires the human to do such extraordinary things? Raising the mind to a higher plane or higher dimension. What inspires a human to put their own life on the line, save another life, and do charitable work in such a way that it is completely altruistic with no thought of their own? What inspires a saint to go into a leprosy column at their own risk and work amongst the poor? It's surely not selfishness. What inspires all these great works of art what inspires the human potential, the human capacity to excel themselves in these areas in a selfless way. These are the outstanding people. Swami Vivekananda made this comment. He who lives for others lives. The rest are more dead than alive. And we're all in the service industry. So this is a way of raising sattva, using, if you will, our hands and heart. Then we have to raise the heart itself, expand the heart, open it up to be a recipient of divine grace. Open it up in love and charity. Open it up to the author of your own life. Open it up in loving, tearful worship of God. Open it up, feel it, and feel corresponding incoming grace. And then what about things we read? What about occupying the mind in different ways? Either trying to understand something through maybe the technology of science or the principle of it, trying to find out how things work, or informing ourselves by reading a scripture, let us say, even the life or sayings of great saints and sages. The other day, we were celebrating, actually it was yesterday, one of Sri Ramakrishna's original disciples registered as an Ishvara Koti or Nitya Sita, one who was previously as pure as you can get for a human. Souls that are perfect from their very birth and not caught up in this confusion that stimulates this desire. We call this confusion Maya. We don't call it sin. We call it a natural condition superimposed on us, nature itself, misdirecting us in a sense of fun, and also giving us the opportunity and resource to bring out the revelation. Both are there, both are true. So this Niranjanananda, named after one who's absolutely have pristine purity and so on. And even so, we find a blemish there because his interest in meeting Ramakrishna was he heard somebody very powerful. And he himself had what we call siddhis, that is, some supernatural or supersensory powers. He was employed by spirit mediums, and he had this very, very insightful sensitivity that was recognized, and that Ramakrishna had told him, forget about all of those, forget about ghosts and all that, direct your mind only to God. The characteristic, therefore, of this pure mind, whose name was Niranjan, was that he was very frank and he was open-minded. And of course, the master who was even more frank, more open-minded, and pure to the hilt, he liked the trait. He liked the frankness, he liked the open-mindedness, and in his opinion, these were rare virtues. That means adhering to the truth. Now, in a summary of the traits that are necessary to prepare the mind for the internal, intimate discovery of your own self, called meditation, the preparation for that is moral training. Moral training, what does it mean? It means in engaging and cultivating the qualities, and one quality will be truth. Now, of course, it's a very difficult thing to live up to. However, this is to be truthful, this element of truthfulness, this element of frankness. Ramakrishna, of course, had it, and he admired it in Niranjan. We find that there are 5 things to be cultivated. Patanjali gives us very, very succinctly. and we can elaborate much more on it. The Torah gives us some commandments, if you will, some moral suggestions. We call these the 10 Commandments. Moses went and got these. And because of Moses' enthusiasm, his drive, his yearning, his energy, success comes to the highly energetic. Patanjali says in his Patanjali Yoga Sutras, is speedy for the energetic. But you see, on the other side, when he was provoked, Niranjana, he would lose all sense of proportion. The famous story of when he was going to Dakshinaswar in a country boat, and some fellow passengers began to speak ill of Sri Ramakrishna in the hearing of Niranjan. Well, Niranjan immediately gets feisty and protests. And finding that it was ineffective, he eventually became furious. And the robust appearance and the furious mood struck terror into the hearts of all the passengers and those who were talking in this counter way. And of course, they immediately apologized to him. And when he relayed this, what did Ramakrishna tell him? He didn't say, well done. He said, oh, anger is a deadly sin. Why should you be subject to it? Foolish people in their pitiable ignorance say many things. Who cares? One should completely ignore them as beneath notice. And of course, we know that in contrast to that, he had a different message for Swami Yogananda, who was mild-mannered. So you can see the manliness and strength of Niranjananda, giving us the idea that we should also be courageous and strong, and that is one of the greatest virtues that we have. He had a strange mix of tenderness and sternness in him, but his love of truth was uncompromising and counted no cost. There's a story, once a gentleman of Kolkata built a Shiva temple in the city of Varanasi, and when Swami Vivekananda heard of this, he remarked, if he does something for relieving the sufferings of the poor, he will acquire the merit of building 1,000 such temples. But when this remark of the great Swami reached the ears of the gentleman, he came forward with a big offer of monetary help. He gave it to the Ramakrishna Mission Home of Service in Varanasi, which was then really in a nucleus kind of state. But afterwards, as the first impulse of enthusiasm cooled down, he wanted to curtail the sum which he had originally offered. Yeah, maybe not so much. Maybe I could offer a little less if it's okay. But this breach of promise so much offended Swami Niranjananda's sense of regard for truth that he rejected the offer completely, altogether, although it would mean a great deal of difficulty for the institution. It's very hard to estimate a spiritual personality who has been cleansed by purity of thinking, by sattvic qualities being cultivated. The height of spiritual eminence of a person can be perceived, and that also only to some extent by the inspiration he radiates. And I'm reading this from the Brief Apostles. Sometimes it's published as the Disciples of Ramakrishna, assembled by Swami Gambhirananda. So Swami Niranjananda left the stamp of his life on many people. Some even renounced everything for the sake of God and joined the Ramakrishna order. Because of his influence, he left one sannyasin disciple. Above all, to know Swami Niranjananda, they said, we must turn to what the Master said about him, and he said this. Swami Niranjananda was one of his antarangas, his inner circle, and that is, he belonged to the inner circle of devotees. That Ramakrishna, who was the embodiment of purity, could have around him. So let us just recap the idea, the concept of purity of mind. The mind should be regarded as a kind of lake that we call chitta. If you want a great description of this, go into the commentary on the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. At the very beginning, the very first few stanzas, Swami Vivekananda gives a wonderful description and commentary based on the ancient commentaries of these sutras. In a nutshell, we see the mind is not a single thing, and although it has component parts, these are waves or variations within a kind of lake that we call chitta, often regarded as consciousness, something that science is very keen to explore. But they're exploring it from bottom up rather than from top down. What do I mean by that? I mean that since the 17th century of Descartes divided things up into the cognition and the physical. And he separated the two. In other words, he went back to the idea of the Greek Democritus, who said everything is reduced down to tiny invisible things called atoms. And this great heresy was carried forward or revived anyway in the modern era since the 17th century. For several thousand years it was still regarded as a heresy, and it is a heresy because it ignores the cognition side of things. It's not that everything can be reduced to these atoms. Now, when we consider this lake, as it were, this chitta, this consciousness, it has nothing to do with atoms. All this consciousness is really in a realm of its own. It's undeniably true because each one of us is experiencing it. And if you take the atomic understanding of it, then it's a very, very convoluted system when you talk about visual accessing, because there is no color according to the system. Red is not red, green is not green. But if you take the cognitive world as non-atomic, then you'll discover that there is something that is not part of the physical world. It is part of a kind of corporeal world. This language I'm using belongs, and I recently was given a book on the weekend anyway, a book, Vedanta in the Light of Christian Wisdom by Wolfgang Smith, who was something of a genius. By the age of 18, he already had degrees in physics, mathematics, and philosophy. He had a doctorate in mathematics. He was tutored students in MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a very prestigious university, if you will, and so highly regarded. But you see, he read Rabindranath Tagore's Gitanjali and was inspired by the ideas there. He went between degrees, or between teaching and completing his degree. He went off to India for 7 months. And not just India, but he went into the heart of the Himalayas and sat with sadhus there. So he has a great understanding of the Vedic religion. And he has a great understanding also of Christianity. And he sees the compatibility of the two. He also sees the differences. Anyway, he puts it like this, that this bifurcatory world that Descartes made is really to be replaced by the tripartite world of Plato. So he's essentially a Platonist. And there we see how it is compatible with the Vedanta, how Vedanta has this tripartite world. We say it as Bhu-Bhuva Swaha. We say it as this world, this corporeal world, and then there is another world there, the world of mind, if you will, and forms. And then there is the eternal world where there's no time or space. He puts it in this way. Now, we experience this, of course, in our own consciousness. And the point I'm making is that consciousness is not really this objective thing working from the bottom upwards, all down to atoms, all down to the organic brain. Not at all. Consciousness is from top down. And what it means is that we begin with pure consciousness, not as a quality, but as an entity. And it is clearly this consciousness that unfolds, as it were. Another way of thinking of it is where we have obstacles in the way that have the tendency to dull or obscure to a greater or lesser extent this pure consciousness. It is by removing these obstacles that we come to this pristine understanding of our own self. And just as the Bhagavad Gita was saying, or Krishna was saying, how the embryo is covered by the womb. The image in the mirror is covered by the dust. The sun is covered by the cloud and so on. The fire is covered by the smoke. So these are examples. And how we move that on, move the cloud on, how we clear the way, how we take the dust off, is purely through a systematic purificatory process, highlighting the capacity that we have to see the best in everything, to be entirely positive, and tap into infinite possibilities and infinite discovery. So these are some ideas. We'll finish off with that. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you so much.